Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here.
Good morning, Amanda, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Hi, good to be here.
I have been really looking forward to this interview, and I know that you have, in your current job, you do lots of work around conflict management and the work you do in the community as well. But before we get to what you're up to at the moment, can you tell us about the first job you ever had as a young person?
Oh gosh, the first yeah, the first job I've ever had was working at the Dairy Queen when I was a teenager. I worked the front counter, so I ran the register, made ice cream, um, and made a little money to put gas in the tank of my car as a new 16-year-old.
I think about the Dairy Queen and in the small town that I live in Martin, and it is busy. I mean, the cars wrap out into the street. So,
hmm
was it a pretty busy environment for a first job?
Oh, it was. And the reason I laugh when you even brought it up is because, this is a podcast about conflict, and I just immediately moments of not handling conflict well flashed into my mind. Just because I think everybody probably should work some sort of like public facing customer service job at some point in their life because you learn so much about how people show up. Yeah, it was very busy and it was the best place for ice cream in town, like it is in most small towns. I was in a small town. And one night we actually ran out of ice cream. Um, yeah, at the Dairy Queen, we ran out of ice cream, and our manager was new and young, and he had given our like extra stock to the cute manager in the town next door. And so, but because of that decision, those of us on the front lines dealt with a lot of angry customers one night.
The Dairy Queen with no ice cream. And for those of you
Yeah.
who don't know what a Dairy Queen is, it's a delightful place to get ice cream and then they sell food. But
hmm
most of us think of it as just a place to get yummy ice cream.
Yeah, that's the main deal.
So, where did you go after Dairy Queen?
Well, I did other odd jobs too. I babysat and did different things. When I was in college, I was really lucky to be the editor of the yearbook there.
Hmm.
By the time I was a junior, I started on the staff and then worked up to being the editor. So that was kind of a fun job. I worked in the housing office there. And then when I graduated from college, I was a middle school teacher for a few years before entering into the world of ministry. So I've done
Did,
a lot of things. Yeah,
did you major in education?
I did. Middle school education.
Middle school. So middle school, sixth, seventh, eighth, is that typically, are those typically the ages? I mean, some people think seventh and eighth. Um, so gosh, it's a special calling to want to be with people as they are in that real transitional age. It's such a rough age on the students, on the parents. Why did you decide middle school?
I really loved that age because of the transition. I think when I and it's a lot of times we understand our lives better when we look in hindsight, right? Like you can see patterns in the ways that you felt led to different things. But as I look back on all the different things I've done, it seems that I am usually called into times of transition. And I think I knew that somewhere deep down, even if I maybe couldn't have articulated it young. Um, I knew that that was an intriguing and exciting space to work in, is to kind of shepherd or walk alongside people as they were experiencing some kind of change. And yeah, that first manifested with middle school, like moving from that innocence of childhood into the um, very tumultuous season of being a teenager. And it was fun. I loved working with seventh graders. They were still a little bit sweet. They were a little salty, just like a fun mix of not really knowing what you're going to get that day. But just I loved teaching school. I loved teaching middle schoolers.
did you find the environment like? All different people experience all different kinds of um, what it's like teaching, a lot of it having to do with the administration and if the
Mhm.
administration is supportive or what's going on. So what was your experience?
So I was teaching school from 2006 to 2009. So, the whole landscape looks a lot different now than it did then. But one of the like the hot items, pieces of legislation that was still kind of impacting the way schools were run was the No Child Left Behind
Mm-hmm.
Act.
Mm-hmm.
And while on the surface that sounds like it was a good idea, what it did was it put a lot of pressure on school administrators to privilege the testing process. Standardized testing became a driving force of how we were to negotiate and navigate our classrooms. And I was not somebody that felt called into teaching, so that I could teach a test. I really wanted to shape and mold and make a meaningful difference in people's lives. And so I found it not the local administration. I actually worked at an excellent school. It was one of the top schools in the state of Kentucky. It was great teachers that I worked with, great administrators that were wonderful mentors and supportive. But we were all kind of held under that pressure of a larger system that demanded particular results. And honestly, we did well on the standardized test. But that whole culture of education at that time was dominated with that conversation. And I was privy to students and other schools in the area that didn't have as easy of a time on the standardized testing, and I saw how that negatively affected students. So I don't know if that answers your question,
Oh,
but
it's
that it
perfect
was
answer because I mean it's just so evocative of what happens when you have a good idea. No child left behind. It's like who cannot get on board with that statement, right? I mean,
right.
say no more, right? I don't want who wants a
Right.
child left behind? All right, so let's do it. So then how does that get implemented? And so my children were in the school system during that time,
Hmm.
and it's like they were little experiments. How we're going to experiment on them with testing more and more and more. And my children have done fine on testing, but
Hmm.
I could see how it did change the environment and
Hmm.
all these unintentional consequences and all the stress because now a teachers in some instances teachers pay is tied to how students are doing
Yes.
on
Hmm.
tests, and as teaching
Hmm.
at a university level it's like I can tell them this is what you need to do to study, but if you don't come to class, if you don't open a book, or of course, with younger children or with children, we don't know what they're going home to.
Hmm.
There's a lot of food insecurity, housing
Hmm.
insecurity,
Yep.
and many children don't know which couch they're going to be on. And
Yep.
so that we've got all of these sociological issues going on with just, if we think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those base needs not being met. And now I know that me as the teacher, right, my paycheck might be tied to how you're doing. And so just that now it's sort of me against you environment,
Mm.
let alone why teachers typically get into teaching is because they want to impart and they have special things to give, and that gets
Hmm.
drummed out in order to pass the test.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will say one of the things that I saw that was so beautiful while we were in that, and everything you named is so true. We had kids at every level, in terms of just their ability level, but also, like you said, their security and their housing and their next meal. We had students who were in foster care that came in and out of the classroom at different times. Um, but I worked with a team of teachers that was exceptional. I mean, I was this 22-year-old straight out of college, and it's like I was granted a golden ticket to be exposed to these wise, seasoned, collaborative, kind teachers that when I was a bit young and impressionable and could have been really demoralized by all this emphasis on testing, they saw something bigger and they created this environment among us as teachers that was very collaborative.
Mm.
And so we kind of tackled the issue together in a way that built community among us as teachers and then built community across the seventh grade floor. So it was kind of like we built this team of it's us against the test, sort of, instead of like the teachers against the students, and maybe not even against the test, but like we're going to tackle this thing together. Open responses, that was like the one of the big questions or methods that they used in the standardized testing at that time. And we had this club where you could earn a t-shirt if you got fours on your open responses. And by the end of the year, we had everybody in a t-shirt, that knew how to write an open response. And so just that collaborative teamwork, encouraging environment it was so formative for me in my very early years of being any kind of professional. And it shaped a lot of how I would like to approach everything I do is by creating a team.
What a gift. What an absolute gift to
Hmm.
have that experience. And it is
Yeah.
just so illustrative. No matter what the issue or problem or opportunity is, how are you going to look at it? So it's so much not necessarily what's going on, but how am I showing up and what is going on around me? And so to have something that could be really difficult and you see it be difficult in other places, right?
Hmm.
And that's definitely one way to go because when something pops up that's demoralizing, we think, oh, we're demoralized, but that's an option, right? That doesn't, you don't have to take that narrative. Rather, it can be
Right.
like you said, let's band together. Let's use our collective resources. Let's support each other to do something great,
Hmm.
right? Oh, I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. It was awesome.
That's such a great picture because no matter where we are, we get to choose, right? Are we gonna, you might think, somebody listening might say, yeah, Mary, Amanda, you don't know where I work. It's like, yeah, but you
Yeah.
work there. You work there.
That's
And
right.
you can find that one other person and then find another person and start that lunch bunch or that coffee or,
Hmm.
and instead of gossiping or whatever, say, oh, what's the thing that we can do for the good? Like, what
Yeah.
are our problems and what can we change? And I think that can be seen as naive, and I'm happy to be called that when I don't think that's really it. It's you have reality as given. Now, what are you going to do?
Yeah. What intentional choices can you make? Yeah, to band together. One of the gifts, you mentioned that coffee or lunch bunch or a gathering place. I think another reason why that team was so powerful is it was just by happenstance of the way our day was blocked off. We just happened to have our planning period right next to our lunch. Now, anybody that's a teacher that's listening to this knows that teachers can eat faster than any human being because you have to like get your students down to the cafeteria into somebody else's hands, quickly inhale your food, and then go pick your kids back up before they've had enough time, to not be busy eating and getting into trouble. So it's like a teacher gets like 15 minutes of lunch, really. But we didn't. We had a whole planning period and our lunch together, and so we capitalized on that space in the day to be in the same room eating lunch and talking over what we were doing in our own classrooms. We shared the same 120 or so students, and so we would spend some time talking about like, hey, Freddie has seems to be really having a bad day, like have you noticed anything? Like, do you know anything that might be going on? Like we really like approached these students as they were in our care together. And even though we each had a different subject matter, um, we just saw it. We took the time to see it from a perspective of us doing it together as a team. But that time was huge. Like
Mm,
having that space in the day to be able to go to that place in conversation. Because a lot of times, a teacher, understandably, and this isn't just with education, but like you have a little bit of free time, you want to take that to yourself,
right. Right. Just to
and
breathe.
you probably need to, have some of that somewhere. But I do think there has to be time that is relational with the team that you're working with, where you can get to know each other as humans, where you can get on the same page of like a common goal and a common vision and see the different angles and ways that you can approach something from the seat that you have,
Yeah.
on whatever team it's on. I do think that was, and again, like it's almost been 20 years ago. Oh my gosh. It's almost been 20 years ago. since I walked into that. But I like the opportunity to have this conversation with you. It just really reminds me like how much of a gift being formed at 22 with this group of people was,
Mm.
because I really think that's why I want a team everywhere I go.
Yeah, because you know what it can be and how
Hmm.
how important it can be. A friend of mine, Margaret Lewis, just reposted something on social media that I saw about how to build a village. And this
Hmm.
woman was talking about her mother, who apparently she's excellent at building a village. Wherever she goes, she can go anywhere, and in 6 months, she's got 50 people that she's, best friends with. And it was really interesting. And this woman was saying a lot of things that Aristotle says about friendship, which is time, proximity, having the same goals and values in mind. It's like all these things that you're talking about. Um,
Hmm.
but a lot of times we want the village or we want the team, but then we don't, we just want it to come to us. But it is work,
Yeah,
right? And
it
there is
is.
some sacrifice, like because it would be lovely
Hmm.
to be tuned out or taking a 20-minute nap, or
Hmm.
whatever it might be. And it is a sacrifice, but you get something great. And isn't that always
Yeah.
how it is? That thing we want
Hmm.
requires something of us to participate,
Hmm.
to be
Yeah.
present and participate. So why
Hmm.
did you leave this glorious team?
Well, the first 2 years I was teaching literature and I loved it. I mean, that is just such a fun place in seventh grade when they're just starting to learn how to think abstractly and think about metaphor and what art can do in the world. That was just so fun. And my third year, um, they, with some different people having to move around in a maternity situation, it turned out that they needed somebody to fulfill seventh grade math. So I would be on the same floor with the same team, but I'd have to move to a different subject area. And I had gotten a degree in language arts and math for that very reason, because I knew math teachers were high demand. It's a very lucrative thing to have that skill. I was good at math, but turns out I was really terrible at teaching math.
Mm.
It's just one of those things that I was not good at. Actually, if you look back at the test scores from that year in seventh grade math, they probably were pretty bad, actually. But but I see that as God's timing in my life, because I don't know that I would have left teaching. I really
Mm,
loved it. But that year was very particularly hard for me,
mm,
because it was clearly not in my wheelhouse.
mhm,
And that's the same year that in the middle of the school year, while I'm teaching, and also I was the cross country coach for the high school in the school district. And we were doing really well. Like we had gone to state for the first time. I had um, really bonded and worked with a group of kids that were also in a season of transition. They had lost a beloved coach and they weren't sure they
mm,
wanted to trust me. But we, had worked through it and we were doing really well as a team. And it was in January of that third year of teaching that the pastor of Murray First called me and said, "Hey, I want you to be our new youth director." And this was like no context at all. Like I had no idea this was coming at not something I'd sought out. And I remember wrestling with that invitation for a really long time. But fast forward a couple of months, and I'm sitting in the church office interviewing for their position as a youth director. And I was hired and actually started before I finished teaching that school year.
mm.
But of course, it was a full-time position, and so I had to transition out after the end of that school year and into what I understand now has been just another layer of my call. I don't think I was not called to teaching. I just think the call just keeps expanding and evolving. So yeah, I went from there into youth ministry. So I still got to work with those middle schoolers, but also high schoolers, and it was teaching, but in a different way. So yeah, that was the exit. It wasn't planned. It unfolded.
It is interesting how that happens. Sometimes, we're not looking, but there had been a pocket that had already opened up, as you said, because of that transition into teaching something
Hmm.
that wasn't, resonating with you. So how long were
Hmm.
you a youth minister for?
So I was a youth minister at Murray for 4 years. And then, and I probably would have stayed there too. Um, I loved it there. It was a good job. the transition was difficult there, that a beloved youth pastor had left, and it was kind of a healing of that community in a way that was really it was meaningful work for me. I really enjoyed building that community and equipping those youth to be leaders. So many of those kids that I worked with then, I look at them now and they make such a difference in the world. And it was cool to know them, like to see that in them when they were young and to
Mhm.
see how that's blossomed in them has been really beautiful. Same thing with the kids I taught too. But so yeah, I had some personal transitions that I went through. I walked through a divorce through in the fourth year of doing youth ministry, and in the midst of that, when you're going through your own transitions, you reevaluate, you're thinking through things. And I had a woman come into my office because I was working on the directory. Because you remember I was a yearbook editor, so I was the church directory person too. So I was
Transferable
up there.
skills. Yes.
It's exactly. Oh, I have a lot of those from random places. But yes, I was working on the church directory, and one of the women that goes to the church walked in, and she said, "Amanda, when are you going to seminary?" And that had been something I actually really first latched onto in college. Um, I grew up in a tradition actually where you didn't become a pastor as a female, but then I met a female pastor in college and was really drawn to her and kind of interested then about like, hey, I wonder if that's something that might be my path, but it wasn't at the time. But then I was like, wow, I've never told anybody this, and she knows that that's something that's on my heart. So I think Miss Doris was a prophet in some ways. It spoke that into me. And so as I kind of went through that personal transition and was reevaluating things, it was a time when doors were wide open. So I took the chance and applied to several different places, chose ultimately to attend Candler School of Theology at Emory University, which meant a move to Atlanta, Georgia, where I knew no one. But it was awesome. I'm so grateful for that experience of kind of starting over and um, just realizing that, the doors are never closed to a new opportunity because it began a whole new path for me. So yeah, that unfolded into a call into seminary, which then I'm a United Methodist pastor. There's a whole process for that. If you go get your MDiv, there's a whole candidacy and ordination process that I began under some guidance and leadership from some mentors. And once you kind of get into that process, you're sort of shepherded along. So when I graduated from seminary, you are in the hands of a bishop and a cabinet that appoints you from there. And so that's kind of where I've lived and existed since then, is in that space of actually, there's a team of people that decide what I do and when I do it. I get to participate in that discernment, but yeah, since then, I've been in their hands.
So when you look over your career, can you tell us about, you just mentioned Miss Doris, but can you tell us about maybe a mentor you had? It could be a boss or a colleague. And when we think about the world of work, so you've got right now a very interesting world of work because you do have a job, you are gainfully employed, and you're a pastor, right? And
Hmm.
so, and then you lead a team that is,
Hmm.
they are working to pay their bills, but they're
Right.
also working in a religious context, right? So you've got a really interesting, when I think about the world of work, a very interesting set of conditions that most people do not have. So
Yeah.
I I got a little bit off track because I do want to go to this. Do you have any sort of mentor that stands out to you? And what are the specific things when it comes to work um, that they showed you or that resonated with you and helped you grow and develop?
Gosh, well, I mean, I think I'd have to go back to those teachers
Yeah.
that I started working. I didn't realize how much they would frame for me of what it looks like to be part of a successful team and to have healthy work relationships and healthy work balance. Um, there have been so many other pastors and ministry leaders. That first campus minister, she, I being a very heart-centric person. That's why I lean into the careers that or the work that I've done, And so I'm very feelings-based. And sometimes that can also mean a lack of boundaries and inability to communicate clearly and professionally sometimes because you're just operating out of a feeling space. And so that campus minister, she was the first woman I've ever seen that was a pastor. So that in and of itself was just this way of mentorship, just to see the role embodied by somebody that looked like me. But the other pieces of it was that she was not necessarily always feelings based. She had very great boundaries. And I remember feeling as a college student like I should just be able to have access to her anytime I wanted. And she would require that I set an appointment to talk to her. And that was different for me. I thought church is like this family experience. You kind of go in and out fluidly, but like she showed me the value of having some boundaries around that and some structure in that. And I think that's kind of always the push and pull. I think your greatest gift is also your greatest weakness. I come in to places pretty emotionally and spiritually tuned in, but I think I'm still learning some of the workplace dynamics of it. And honestly, Mary, you've been a teacher for me. One of the things yeah, you came and helped our staff as we kind of were navigating, because that you said that so well. I am the manager of a staff, most of whom I'm also their pastor because they're members of the church where they work. And I don't take that lightly. I also was on a staff and had a pastor that was my boss, and that worked out well for me. It was fine. We were aligned, and I was young enough too. I don't think I had different expectations of what a working life should look like. Um, but when I got here to the church, after working with college students, I spent 5 years as a campus minister, which is a totally different dynamic working with college students. But one of the biggest challenges I had at the church was that balance of like being the workplace manager that the staff needed and their pastor and being spiritually focused as well. And one of the things you taught me, Mary, was clarity in communication. I am not a person who loves to think about authority. When you preach a gospel of Jesus who carries a cross, who humbles himself, who is God that became man, there's a lot of my conviction that says not to abuse power and not to step too heavy with power. But I learned in the process of you working with our staff that power exists, whether we want it to or not, but being really clear about how to leverage that power and share that power is really, really important. And that's something I think I'm still learning. And as we walk through that as a staff, I've seen the more clear we can be about simple things like processes and procedures, like how do you ask for time off? and and who do you go to? It seems like such a simple thing, but if those things are clear, then you have less of kind of the big emotional conflict that you thought you were going to avoid by being tuned in emotionally and spiritually. But actually, I think it creates more
Right.
when you're not addressing those things.
It's so true, as you were saying, when you were in college and having to make an appointment, right? And you're like, that
Hmm.
doesn't kind of sit right. What's going on there?
Hmm.
And yet it is that order, right?
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
orders everything else. And when we think, oh, this is artificial, or why does it need to be there? If it's not there, then it really is a kind of brittle house of
Hmm.
cards. And I think a lot of times, there was a movement not too long ago in the world of work where we are going to flatten the structure, and some people are still trying to do this, and nobody's going to be in charge. And it's almost like no time, there's no paid vacation. You can just take whatever you want, right? So like
Hmm.
unlimited
Hmm.
PTO, unlimited. And we
Hmm.
all know that unlimited means don't take it, right? I mean, it's not
Hmm.
unlimited, right? You
Yeah.
need to say you have 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever it is. And then the person, just like a bank account, decides how and when they're going to use it. It's like giving
Hmm.
people permission. And so um, it is important, all those mechanisms where I kind of feel like I'm like you, like, oh, let's just show up and figure things out. But
Yeah.
I've through my own experience, I realized no, the structure then helps people figure things out. But people need a
Hmm.
structure because their boss, whether the boss recognizes it, she knows what it is that she wants, even if she's not articulating it. And so, and all the staff know it because people have worked different places. And now I'm just got to guess, right? Instead of just tell me,
Hmm.
most people just want to
Hmm.
be told, and
Yep.
then we'll do
Yep.
it.
Yep. Yep. I had the good fortune of having a person on our staff for a little while that was very gifted in that process. And I remember she was hired the first day. She came in and, the work continues, the work continues. And thankfully, she is just not a high maintenance person and she kind of could roll with it. But I mean, she asked me how to make a car. She said, "Where is the copy machine?" And I said, "Yes, we have a copy machine." We did not even do her the favor of like teaching her how to use the copy machine or where it is. And so like because of her influence on our staff, she did so much of our work around policy and procedures and setting up that order. And it was such a gift that she was willing to walk with me as I learned that this was a gap here.
Mm.
And we got to be a team and like creating a structure that then when somebody else, like we've made a hire since then, and then we're about to make another one. And now we have this team of people in our SPRC that knows how to onboard a person
Mhm.
and like introduce them to the culture of the church. And that's a funny thing that happened with me too here because um, I was working at UTM Wesley Foundation, which is a college ministry that's in the same town as the church, and the church supported that ministry. So I was often in this very pulpit, preaching from time to time, leading from time to time. Some people even thought I was a paid staff person, even though I wasn't. But when I got appointed here as the pastor, there was so much assumption that they thought I knew how things were supposed to go.
Mhm.
And because I'm the pastor and in charge, like I'm supposed to have these answers when I knew nothing about the staff culture and
Mhm.
how any of that got run. And then suddenly I was supposed to have all the answers. So it was a gift of an experience to have this colleague show me her experience of those gaps and me come to terms with how I had those gaps and how those gaps were making it a difficult workspace, and then kind of incrementally just bringing people along and filling those gaps. Yeah, and it works biblically, I don't know if everybody that listens, is I'm not assuming a shared faith value here, but in the Christian tradition, we have this Old Testament scripture of a God that um, took chaos and created order. The very first story in scripture is about a God that takes the chaos of life and puts it in an order that we can exist in and live in and have these rhythms that are so helpful and clarifying. We know when to be awake, we know when to sleep. You know, these are very simple, basic things that we do need to be able to function at our best levels. I think in all of life, but also in the workplace. Yeah.
I love that story of you starting and then this colleague starting because so many times we get into a place and it is a kind of baptism by fire. Like we're just thrown
Hmm.
into it. We're supposed to hit the ground running because there's this gap. That's why we're there. And
Hmm.
if there isn't this really robust, thought through onboarding process and mentoring, we're just going to be where's the bathroom? Where's this? What's happening? And it adds stress and chaos to already
Hmm.
a chaotic, exciting, but um, a real opportunity to get things wrong, right? Where everyone is
Hmm.
looking at us to see if we made a good hire. So
Right.
it's so important in order to attract and retain good people that we really think through the onboarding process. And so, but then once we're through it, we don't think about it anymore because we made it through it. And now we're in the place. And in a way, we're breathing the same air. And then a new person comes in a way, it's like this amnesia. We forget what it was like because we've
Hmm.
passed it and it's not a problem for us anymore. So
Right.
you also illustrated the importance of hiring well. You know,
Mm.
when you hire well, when you hire the right kind of people who can say, just to show you the gaps, and then, but all that reciprocity to be able to vocalize it from the employee's point of view, but then to be able to receive it and say, you're
Hmm.
right, instead of, some people, you're new, you have nothing to offer. The new person has so much to offer because they see things that
Hmm.
you don't see in the business of getting things done.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, the gaps that are there that are blind spots, or maybe you've just always filled them in with what you assumed they were to be. Yeah, a new person always offers a fresh perspective, and when they are brought in a collegial, I mean, that's what they did for me in that seventh grade team. You had all these seasoned veterans, and here I was a new graduate, and they treated me like somebody worth their time and made a space for me and made me an equal on the team. And I
Mm-hmm.
contributed to that team as a
Mm-hmm.
very young player. So yeah, I'm glad you highlighted that because I think welcoming people at that level and being open to what they can show you about yourselves, what kind of mirror they're holding up. Um, it's really valuable.
Yeah. And it can be tough when we're on a wonderful team and then somebody leaves and somebody new comes in, or we're on a shaky team and somebody leaves and somebody new comes in. Always really thinking about, that collaborative environment. So how are we going to bring that about? And it doesn't, as you know, just come about by accident. It comes about by this
Mm-mm.
intentional, sustained effort. And so
Mm-hmm.
thinking about, what is it we want? And since you have had these experiences of knowing what it could be, I think
Mm-hmm.
when I look at I watch lots of social media of people who are having problems at work because I'm interested in problems at work.
Sure.
It
Yeah.
just strikes me, I mean, so many people are in despair, and I think maybe they've never had they don't know that it doesn't have to be this way, that it ought not
Mm-hmm.
be that way. It shouldn't be adversarial. No matter what you're doing, whether you are at a call center or the janitor or in the C-suite or wherever you are, it doesn't have to be dysfunctional or toxic. It can be really life affirming and a positive place, independent of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you talk about the change and transitions that happen. Something I've learned too in the time of being in this role. I've been here 4 years and we've had multiple turnovers. Not just because, I mean, people have had opportunities. This is very true of church staffs anyway. It's not often that we can offer things like full insurance benefits that are just necessary things for most working adults. So two or three different positions have rolled over, and we were in a season this past fall where we knew based on our budget numbers that the staff structure we had wasn't a sustainable structure. So we knew more change was coming. Um, what we did through that process was basically just start being transparent from day one with the entire staff and congregation about what our numbers were, what this looked like. We allowed a space for everybody to have input. And then we did a process where we had to consolidate some jobs and make some changes. And I will tell you, I was very afraid after having to have gone through other kinds of conflict and just confusion in the experience. But it was one of the most beautiful things I was ever a part of to walk through that process because we had from day one just been really clear in communicating what was happening with everybody. And it gave everybody that was a part of that equation agency and how they wanted to respond in that space. So there was something about like respecting the people, whatever their position was, by giving them the full picture and letting them decide how they were going to show up or what they were going to do that was best for them and best for the ministry and the organization. Because there's not many people who work for a church that do it for the money or, you know,
Right.
like they're there for altruistic reasons. And so, um, in a very beautiful way, there were people who laid it down because that was not only best for them, but also best for where the ministry had to go. And it was a chance to showcase this greater thing that everybody, regardless of whatever conflict we've been through, everybody was in agreement that this greater thing is why we're here.
Hmm.
And so we let that be the thing and communicated from that space. And it's been really humbling to see
Hmm.
how that transition has been so smooth.
Wow. I mean, what is courage? Courage is not the absence of fear, but it's you feel it and you do it anyway. You do the right thing.
Mhm.
So many people, they are going to work and all of a sudden they see on their calendar, oh, there's a 15-minute meeting with HR, and they know what that means. They're going to be fired that day. They're going to be let go.
Mm.
And I understand big, giant 30,000, 100,000 people, organizations, things are going to work differently. But I don't ever understand treating people so poorly. I
Yeah.
don't think it's ever
Yeah.
acceptable. And
Mm-mm.
transparency when things are rough, transparency when things are good. But, you know, if the writing is on the wall, if the leadership knows this is the reality of the budget or the marketplace or whatever, let's just let
Hmm.
everybody know. This
Yeah.
is what's going on. We are going to be having to consolidate. These are the reasons, and we're going to start thinking about um, what we're going to be doing with our resources. And these are the kinds of priorities that we have. And so we're going to be thinking about this and giving people the opportunity to ruminate. But the damage that is done
Hmm.
when you know that they knew this was coming down, but they didn't trust you enough to allow you ample time to make plans, where you could have had 6 months or 3 months, and now you've got 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You know, we want to leave people better than we found them. I
Hmm.
believe that is our moral obligation, and that definitely has to do with work. No matter where we find these people in our families, in
Hmm.
the community, at work, and the reality is that budgets shrink, companies go under. This is what happens, and sometimes it's
Hmm.
because of poor management, and sometimes it's because a product isn't used anymore. There's just a lot of reasons, sometimes just no fault, and yet it is the reality. So treating people as adults, but it can be scary because we don't want to hurt people and we want to delay the pain, but in delaying it, it's selfish
Yeah,
and it
it
makes
is.
it more painful and more damage is caused.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
agree.
congratulations on that, being afraid and doing it anyway.
Well, it was so humbling and really again it's going to shape so much of how I see moving forward, just trusting people
Mhm. Mhm.
and what was also cool is that it isn't that so everybody that ended up transitioning off of the staff in that season uh, is moving into something that's better for them personally anyway.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I think, yeah, when we let it unfold in that way, it's kind of amazing. It's that idea of having an abundance mindset over a scarcity mindset, that there are, yes, you might be limited in resources in this area, but that doesn't mean that there's not enough of of whatever to go around for people to have fulfilling and meaningful work or lives. So yeah, it was cool.
So as you think about, as you've grown and developed as a leader and a pastor, can you maybe tell us about how maybe you used to deal with conflict as a younger professional and maybe how you think about conflict now or a particular conflict, however you'd like to think about that?
Mm, that's a good question. So, as somebody who is astute to people's feelings in a room, I'm kind of one of those people who walk in and sort of can gauge a temperature pretty quickly. I think the way I used to use that gift was to try to manage people's feelings for them. And it is a little bit of, I'm talking as if it's completely past tense. Let's not let's not pretend I didn't do that on Tuesday. But it is a pattern I've noticed and become more aware of and try to do less of managing people's feelings for them. And the story I just told you is an example of like letting them manage the circumstance themselves, just telling the truth of the circumstance
Mm.
and giving them and trusting them with their feelings and their ability to manage that and dealing with whatever conflict that might come out of it as it comes. But so to answer your question, I think I might have had less direct conflict that was just like clearly a difference of opinion or an outright disagreement, but I had a lot of passive aggressive conflict in the trying to manage people's feelings and control their reactions or please them, right? In what, because you can't do that for everybody, and so that puts you in a tailspin, and it compromises your own integrity, trying to operate in that way. So I think as I'm growing, and I'm still growing, like I said, it's not something I've completely outgrown. Um, the way that I'm learning to manage this is to just be more clear from the front about what the circumstance is, and let people have their own feelings and reactions to whatever's going on. Another thing is, somebody like me also might like take it, take it, take it, take it, and then get really frustrated. Like this past fall, as we were preparing to move through all this stuff that I knew was coming, I noticed myself have a really outsized reaction to a situation that was really not that big of a deal. And I realized that I wasn't dealing with my own conflict or frustration in a way that was honest with me.
Yeah.
And thankfully, like, no damage was done in my outsized reaction. It was something that happened with my husband, and he's gracious and loves me, and there was forgiveness and good conversation afterwards. But what I noticed in that outsized reaction was like, oh, this is a result of a lot of other things building up. And so just learning to deal with conflict is actually like learning to deal with conflict, right? Like to actually like
Yeah.
address that there is conflict there, and then to be curious about what might be going on. I caught myself somewhat recently in the last few months sitting with somebody who was having a difficult time. And it became clear in the conversation that the person had a negative response to what was going on. And I noticed in myself that my first instinct was to try to manage this person's reaction to what was going on. And it was really sad to me after a little bit of reflection to realize what I missed there was an opportunity to actually do the work I love, which is to be with that person in the difficult things that were being processed in that moment. I had gotten so task focused and trying to redirect her that I actually missed like, oh, I needed to sit with this person for a minute
Mm-hmm.
and listen and hear what's going on below the surface, and be curious there. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that completely answers your question, but I think just stop managing people's response and just let them have their responses. That's the thing I'm learning. And then you can be with them and be much more useful with them if you're letting them just have space to be who they are.
Yeah. Gosh, I just feel like you got inside of my head. Like that is how I am. I mean, I've been a sponge. I've been trying to
Mhm,
manage the emotions of the room, a people pleaser. And
mhm,
it is this very thing of just allowing people to have their own emotional responses, trusting them, and so much of me wanting to sop up the negativity, where
mhm,
the fact of the matter is negative and bad things happen. And I think part of the goal of conflict management is not to get rid of the negative, but to accept it. Like,
mhm,
yeah, this is hard,
mhm,
but it is
mhm.
your hard. And if I take it on, I'm making things worse because it really isn't about me. And
Yeah.
so taking the mirror off of myself so that I can be present, right? It's everything that you've just said. But this whole trying to wipe away all the bad is just not. I think I'm on a lifelong journey to give up that pursuit and find a different
Mhm,
one, right? In order to bring
mhm.
good into the world, to bring light, um, is it's a different way of being than what I
Mhm,
thought. Oh,
mhm.
here I am helping people, but what I'm doing is not because I'm telling them I'm uncomfortable with this. You need to tap it down. Suck it up like I do, right? Push it
Yep,
down.
yep, yeah.
Until, as you said, you explode at somebody, right?
Mhm,
Because everything
mhm,
comes out. So, I think that's a really,
mhm.
really lovely, very wise of, and it's a process. especially if you've
Hmm.
operated in one way for a long time, if you've been conflict avoidant or um, whatever it might be, but how to really be with people in all their circumstance and let them be them. And, the whole let them theory
Hmm.
that's big right now. It resonates with me.
Yeah, I haven't read it, but it is very intriguing. It sounds like something I need to read.
So, as we end our time together, if you think into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen? So, this is a two-parter for you. Okay.
Okay.
So, what do you think needs to happen in general in the world of work so that not only will everybody be treated with dignity and respect, but that we will thrive and flourish? So, that's like my standard question. But I want to ask now a second part because you do work in this very unique space of being a pastor, working
Mm.
in a church. So, would you change that answer at all for those special set of circumstances of people working in churches and religious organizations? Um, you're not just volunteering, but you're working. What needs to happen in those spaces so that people will thrive and flourish?
That's such a good question. I think we're learning as we go. I don't know that I have a crystal ball that could tell you what I think is going to be the best practices moving forward. But I think what I notice right now is that we are in seasons of change and transition in every area of culture, in the church life, faith, religious life. It's in its own different cultural shifts, but pretty much every institution that we know is in a season of some kind of change. And I think change means excitement for some people, it's scary for others. Um, I know that there's a tendency, uh, I'm reaching a point in my life where I can't really say I'm the young one anymore. But a lot of times, sometimes when you come in with youth, you think the new thing is the thing that is the most important and most relevant, and that needs to be, and then you can also argue that wisdom and experience is the most important. And I think there is this space where there's got to be room for all of it. To be heard. I remember hearing on a Brene Brown podcast one time that one of the worst feelings in the world is to feel, I think the word she might have used was inadequate or like outdated, like
Mm,
not relevant
mhm,
anymore. Um, and I just don't think it's true that any person from any perspective is not relevant. But we might over prioritize one perspective over another. And so in the church world, the Christian church world, we talk about this thing that's the kingdom of God that's like very inclusive of every kind of person. And that in practice is very difficult. And the Apostle Paul writes letters to churches because there was not any in the early church that figured it out perfectly. That way of learning how to live that includes all different kinds of people and all different kinds of circumstances is very difficult. But then that's why he wrote about these fruits that happen when you offer yourself to that, like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. Like that is the fruit of putting yourself in proximity to difference, to
mm,
diversity, to acceptance, kindness, like putting yourself in that circumstance and valuing something that is greater than all of you, um, more than your own ego, your own perspective. Um, it's hard, but I think it's going to produce the best fruit. So I guess that's kind of the faith angle of it. But like just practically nuts and bolts. So like I know enough to know that in work culture, there's a lot of differing opinions around like working in the office or working from home. And everybody has an argument about like why one of those is better, right? And I just think not assuming one over the other and allowing the circumstance, the context, the needs of your employees, being curious as you approach those conversations over and above like a hard and fast line about how you do things. It's things are just going to shift, and allowing creativity and different expressions in that shift, I just think it's so important. I don't know if that was a very clear answer, Mary, but
I love that answer
this,
because I think it really pairs well with what we said in the very beginning about needing a structure. But we
mhm.
want structures that will withstand earthquakes, right? So you don't want to build
Yeah.
your house so rigid that it just crumbles. But it was a nice structure. But if you don't have
Hmm.
any structure, it won't stand up. And so it is that
Hmm.
it's that mix of need both. We need to have the structure, but in the structure needs to be able to absorb the changes and grow and develop. And so it isn't an either or, it's a both and. And one of my favorite words is curiosity. How do we get that?
Hmm.
Curiosity and grace and love.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of exciting when you think about it. Who
Mhm.
knows what it's like we get to be on the forefront of I think big shifts and big changes are happening right now, but yeah, I don't think it's all or nothing. So
Yeah, I agree.
yeah.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much. What a fun conversation.
Yeah, this was great, Mary. Thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed it.
Me too. Well, take care. Thank you, Amanda, for being on Conflict Managed. I have known Amanda for a few years now, and what a delightful soul. I'm so thankful for the work that you are doing to love people, and you are just such a person filled with light and grace. So I'm very, very thankful to have you as a part of my life. Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back, we have new episodes every Tuesday. And if you want to watch this conversation with Amanda and I, you can go on over to YouTube and it's at 3P Conflict Restoration. If you haven't had a chance to check out my book, How to Be Unprofessional at Work, Tips to Ensure Failure, it's 80 tips of what not to do and starts a conversation about what to do instead. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.